Let's see.
Hello, Trey.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. My name's Trey Carland, and my guest today is Fred Davis, who is a author and spiritual teacher here in the area. You're in South Carolina, correct?
Right, Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay, good. I'm in Asheville, so we're not too far away.
No, that's my second home.
It's a good second home to have.
Yeah, it is.
I guess first off, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey. You know, I read about it in the book, The Journey Home, which was Volume 2. That was a good book. My story was in Volume 1, and that's a nice little project with
it is a nice project.
A couple dozen people that have experienced awakenings and their stories. And I'm always a sucker for a good awakening story anyway. So maybe, you know, without getting too deep, because I know you've got quite a fascinating one, but maybe you can tell us some of those highlights.
Well, let me start at almost the end, which is that having met with a defeated life, in other words, I had some good days and some successful times as a normal human being, and living in the suburbs and all that kind of stuff, and that crashed and burned due to my alcoholism. I threw it away, and I ended up going from there to living in a park in Portland, Oregon. I mean, that didn't happen immediately, but within a few years, I was reduced to being homeless. I was a homeless drunk in Mount Tabor City Park in Portland, Oregon. And I managed to, however, by the grace of God, literally, I got out of that park and didn't die there. I still don't know how that didn't happen, but I'm not going to question it.
Yeah.
And then I got sober, and just as my life began, I got sober through 12-step recovery. And just as I began to get stable, 4 years into recovery, in my first year of recovery, I had gone around and made amends. That's part of the recovery process. I had gone around and made amends to people. And but there's nothing in that book that says they have to accept our amends. And the delay is a little bit of a mystery, but 4 years after I made that amends, or 3.5 years after I made that amends, somebody decided they didn't take them, and I ended up getting arrested. And so just as I was getting back on my feet, I got knocked back on my back again. And I just didn't really want to. I had come back from the alcoholism. I just didn't feel like I could come back from legal troubles too. Just to get the wind knocked out of my sails right then was just too tough. But I nonetheless tried, because I had a brand new business as a bookseller on the internet, and I love being an entrepreneur, and so I thought I'll give that a shot. I spent the next 2.5 years, though, in deep, deep suffering as that trial became nearer and nearer. I had a pretty good lawyer. A real good lawyer. You put it off for a while, but 2.5 years later, here it came, and I pled guilty, so there was no question about what was going to happen. But with the outcome, we didn't know. We didn't know what that was going to be. But fortunately, my life was already a shining example of living well in recovery. And so what I ended up having to do was go to jail on the weekends and stuff. And that doesn't sound so bad, 23 weekends in a row. But it was supposed to be 45 weekends in a row. I did halftime because I went out and picked up trash on the highways like you see these guys do. And but I was already so busy. I was the busiest guy I knew selling cheap books on the internet. And I was busy. I worked 7 days a week. Now that got truncated into 5 days a week. Plus I got put on probation. I was under heavy restriction. It was just more really than I felt like I could bear. And I asked my wife, my then girlfriend, now wife, I said, she had had her partner had blown his brains out like a few years earlier, and I didn't want to do that on her by surprise. So I asked her, I said, I need your blessing. I really want to commit suicide. And she said, well, I really don't want you to. And I said, I know, but I can't do this. And she said, well, come on and try it for a while. Just try it. And you can go to that if it doesn't work out. But I'll help you with this. I'll help you with that. Please give it a try. So I decided that, you know what? If I can't do anything with this miserable life other than make this sweet woman's life a little less miserable, then that's what I'm dedicating it to. So I'm going to try to stay alive for Betsy. But I had lost all interest in my story. I didn't want to be Fred. I didn't care anything about it. It was like, no thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 weeks later, I was sitting in my living room reading Ramesh Balsekar's Pointers from Nisargadatta. And he asked a question. And when he asked that question, in that moment, and I never read one like this, so it's interesting, but in that very moment, the body froze. It just completely froze. But it felt like that something the size and shape of a BB turned in my head 180 degrees, and I felt it lock or unlock, whichever one it did. But I heard that it clicked, and I guess it was probably unlocked. And then when that hit, boom, there was the awakening. First there was the body frozen, but then all of the, that as soon as that clicked, then oh my God, the first thing that I was like, can this be it? And it was like, God Almighty, it can't not be it, and the first thing that I thought of was that, oh my God, what I've been looking with is what I've been looking for. And I thought that was like my original pointer, and I thought it was the greatest pointer I'd ever heard. Never heard it like that before. And I decided I must be going to wake up the world with that, because I just assumed I could say that sentence and everybody would wake up, right? But I found out that's not quite the case. And but my original thing there, I was surfing the internet about 2 years later, and I ran across a teacher. I can't remember his name, but a teacher in New York City, good guy, and on the front of his website, he had stolen my original thing, and it just said, "More, what you've been looking with is what you've been looking for is what you've been looking with." But he attributed it to Saint Francis of Assisi.
Oh.
And that's when I found out it wasn't an original thing after all, and that the saint and the rascal had seen the same thing, because there's only one thing to see. It can be seen different ways, but ultimately there's only one truth to see.
Mm-hmm.
Which is that there's one thing going on, and you're it.
I was also going to ask you a little bit about addiction, because probably all through my 20s I was addicted to alcohol and tobacco and that sort of thing, and I was a really functional addict. I drank in the evenings, but every single evening I had several drinks, and I think by today's definitions that would call me an alcoholic, but never skipped a day, and but I never had an intervention, so to speak. People weren't telling me, you need to get your stuff together, because I was perfectly functional. I
had about 40 of those, but I didn't hear them. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then I guess I was 30, 31, somewhere in there, and out of the blue, I was diagnosed with epilepsy, had grand mal seizure, and that was in effect life's intervention, saying...
Well, I remember now. I've read your story too. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was kind of my wake-up call, I guess.
Yeah.
And I attribute it, at that point in time, I scaled back my drinking and eventually stopped drinking, but prior to that, I actually quit smoking for a time, and that I'd started smoking when I was a teenager, and I was in my late 20s, and for some reason I said, okay, I'm finally going to quit. And when I quit, I started crying uncontrollably with that last cigarette. And I was like, it was beyond me why that was happening. And it wasn't, I guess, until years later that I realized it wasn't just giving up tobacco, it was giving up a part of my identity.
Oh, absolutely. I can remember crying when I quit. But just... it's absolutely a part of your identity when you're a heavy smoker. I was a heavy smoker.
Yeah. And you're not anymore?
No, I quit about 10 years ago.
Okay. It was fascinating to me at the time that, I wasn't a very emotional or sensitive person, but that last cigarette was just... And the only thing that got me through it was, I'll probably smoke again.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's
and of
good.
Course, a couple of years later I did, and I've gone back and forth, but ultimately these days it's once in a while. I'll have a drink once in a while.
Right.
So but I view that as part of the journey. And I'm not sure exactly when you decide you're going to indulge in different types of intoxicants, whether or not there's this, especially if you're a spiritual seeker, there's this justification that this is what needs to happen right now. This is what's arising. This is entering my consciousness for one reason or another. Right. And it's in my best interest, because life always has my best interest at heart.
Yes. Right.
So these...
Boy, isn't that convenient.
I know. And of course, addiction
I get to do whatever I want. Right.
I know. I guess that's kind of where I'm going with this. It was a crucial part of your journey. It was a part of my journey, though our journeys are quite different. But when you talk to people who are suffering from addiction of various sorts, and they're coming from that place of this is me, this is part of what's going on for me, what would you tell them?
Well, I do work with a lot of people, because my first book was Beyond Recovery, Non-Duality, and the 12 Steps.
Right, I meant to mention that.
That's all right. I'm not trying to just plug it. I'm just trying to give a little bit of my background. And that book, as a result of that, I do get a lot of email, and I have a lot of clients who have been in recovery, or some of them who are still in recovery. And the first thing that I will tell them was that I couldn't have, this is all languaging, so it's none of it's going to be comfortable, on target or comfortable. But I couldn't have what I have, so to speak, if I had not first gotten sober. I had to get sober before I could get this, because I have people who will write me, and they're trying to get this instead of doing some sort of recovery. And that's what I did for about 20 years, was I did anything I could do that didn't involve quitting drinking. But ultimately, for me at least, and I know it works differently for different people, but mine, I think, is a fairly average path. It's not an unusual path, which is, I'm just a garden variety drunk. And I just had to get sober and stable first, because I had slid so far. By the time you become homeless in a park, and I was sick and living in the bushes, you're right there at death's door. It's a miracle I didn't die of exposure or something. And so once you have been there, you've got a point of real reflection. That was my bottom, as we like to say. Yeah. And no matter what, I just didn't want to go back to the park. And if that involved quitting drinking, okay. And I tried to quit drinking the way you quit smoking, which was that, I tried always before. I didn't try it this time. This time I really opened up. But always before, when I tried to quit drinking or tried to quit smoking, I wanted to be the same person, just not have those pesky addictions. Mm-hmm. And I actually don't remember anybody that I met in recovery who remained precisely the same person they were when they came into recovery, who managed to get clean or sober. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because that guy, and what I tell people is, and I still, for me, this is still true, is that if it's not true, I'm not going to find out, because my life's doing great. And every time I've thought in the past that I could, or surely I can drink again, I found out I couldn't. Mm-hmm. So I pass. And but there, in my sense, is that the Fred Davis who was who was a problem drinker. I was an alcoholic, don't get me wrong, but the Fred Davis that had this deeply serious, fatal drinking condition, he still got it. But it's just, and I don't even want to say he's not here, although I haven't seen him in years. But somewhere in here, that still resides. But I'm not. But but almost like genetically, because there's no sign of him really. I'm surprised. Honest to God, I'm surprised I have the same fingerprints. It's that much change since. Especially because 6 years into recovery, I woke up. So I got the 1-2 punch. I got recovery, and so that changed me dramatically. And then this thing happened. Oh my God, The last almost 8 years has just been quite the quite the journey. So that Fred Davis note, he may still exist, but it was not evident. I didn't try to hold on to him. I tried. I didn't try to get rid of him either. I simply tried to live a new way that they taught me, and for me, that would save my life. No question, it saved my life. No question whatsoever. And my wife's life too. Same exact thing. I met her in recovery, and she was a low bottom drunk, just like I did. My wife looks like an attractive school teacher, and she can tell you about drinking vodka right straight out of the bottle behind the dumpster at the liquor store. You know, so so getting sober first, then come here, and what happens is that a lot of people get into recovery and they get in and they go in there fresh and are scared to death, most of them, and suffering, and so they'll adapt to that lifestyle. But for me, I found that lifestyle was a little cyclical. You know, you get through the 12 steps and you're supposed to work them again. It was like, you know, this, that, and the other. It just found the whole thing to be a little cyclical for me. So I stayed in it for a long time, and I did a lot of work in recovery, and I did a lot of good. I can see that. And I got a lot of good out of it. But at some point, I was much later than most, I decided, you know, this is not for me, and I can't do this anymore. I was awake, and they just, by the time, as I became more and more awake, they thought I had lost my mind, quite literally. And so I just had to, you know, get out of there because we no longer had anything to talk about. Some people can transfer this thing to AA language. What's our friend's name on the West Coast who's so the recovery guy that's so good? I can't think of his name. I've talked to him on the phone, but but I just got to where I couldn't. What I get a lot of now is people that's the very same place, but they're only a year into AA, or 2 years, or 6 months in, and they get it, and they're grateful to be sober, but the rigid structure of that of the 12-step thing, whether we're talking about whatever kind of 12-step group. I don't want to name mine, so because you're not supposed to, and I've done it before publicly, but I'm trying to avoid it these days. So that I forgot where I was, Trey.
People that come to you that are
yeah. So when people come to me now, I mean, it's just get sober now. Then and so they're a year in, they're 6 months in, they're 18 months in, they're 5 years in, and they just hit a wall with AA. Or with whatever. So with whatever 12-step program they're involved in, or even non-12-step program that they're involved in. But if it's any kind of program, but particularly 12-step, which has got a very rigid structure. And that's what I needed when I came in, because I needed somebody to tell me, do it like this, and don't vary. And that's just what I did. And I wouldn't let myself touch, because I then called it Zen. I wouldn't let myself touch Zen for a year because I knew I'd find out what was wrong with this program and get drunk. But my book is actually meant to be a bridge. It's not Scott Killaby addresses practicing addicts with what he's doing. My book is actually written for the people who are already recovered and have already recovered from their drinking or their using, and have hit that wall of I got to stay sober, but I can't do this, right? Not like they're doing it. I got to have some, and if you're in California, I have a client of mine who's 45 years sober, or 40 years sober, 45, I forget, real long time. And he's, works with he's a magician out there. I mean, as far as he just works with a lot of guys and does a lot of good. And he talks non-duality to him in AA language. And in California, you'll find some of that. In some other places, New York City, you'll find places like that. Just around, the more enlightened areas of our country, you'll find that. Columbia, South Carolina is not one of those. Asheville is one of those.
Yeah.
Asheville is one of those.
Yeah.
So really, it's San Francisco. These kinds of places you'll find where they've merged together, and you're not so locked out. But the majority of people that I talk to are, they're on the outskirts or something like me. They're in Columbia, South Carolina, or they're in Kansas City, or they're wherever, and it's just not a whole hell of a lot of enlightened AA going around.
Right.
So it's so that's what my book is for, and it's just because this is the path. This is that book is meant to be the bridge, but this is where getting sober or getting clean. I don't mean this insultingly to anybody in recovery, but for me, as I look back on it, it's like enlightenment light, because it's a huge fundamental shift in your personality. You were talking about that identity. It's a huge shift in your identity. It's a huge shift in your personality. It's a huge shift in your actions if you take all that stuff seriously, which I did. Yeah. And you guess what? You quit drinking, and your life begins to improve, and the next thing you know, man, and it is a spiritual awakening, not in the same way that we talk about it in non-duality, but it is a spiritual awakening. And so it turns out that bridge, because of that bottom in recovery, that low bottom, that's where we had to surrender. So and AA is or NA or anything, they're all a culture of surrender. And that prepares you very well for this,
right.
Which is, we could call this the culture of surrender too,
right?
The culture of self-surrender. So there's things in AA. There's a prayer, third step prayer, and it's absolutely non-dual, and it starts out kind of dualistic, but it ends up on a completely non-dual note. And I think there was non-dual stuff. They didn't call it that, but it was non-dual stuff. I know there was. I've read the history going on in the early parts of this program. But it just, just like us, it's hard to give this thing away. So that's kind of my take on recovery.
Yeah. Well, I read your second book, The Book of Undoing, and I really enjoyed it. I actually read it twice, and then there's a couple sections I keep coming back to, and I remember one sentence I made note of that's just so simple. It's pay attention to attention.
Yes.
And sort of that sentence wraps it all up. But you can't just say that to somebody and the light go on necessarily.
No.
So the rest of the book is kind of you in a dialogue with a generic person who's asking questions and trying to get elaboration on that. And I think you do a really good job of trying to put that into layman's terms, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Trying to make it simple.
Yeah.
What I've discovered a few things, because since I wrote that book, I have done about, I don't know, some of them have been clarity sessions, but I've done hundreds and hundreds of awakening sessions since that time.
Wow.
Where, because it's as soon as that book hit out, because I have a blog, awakeningclaritymail.com, and so in other words, I had a ready audience, and when that book came out, it went into Amazon's top 10 for Eastern philosophy and stayed there for 10 months.
Nice.
So it immediately people started calling me.
Yeah.
Because some people did wake up from that book, but a lot of people could just see that the truth is in here. I just can't quite get it out by myself.
Right.
And and I found out a number of things from that. And one of the things that I have found out is that I make this childishly simple. In my awakening sessions, I just bring everything to just where it's just silly almost. It's so clear because I don't give the mind any wiggle room. People get mad at me because I tell them it's a yes or no question. And they're like, no, but it's a... And I said, it's a yes or no question. Which is it? And because it isn't a yes or no question, just the ego doesn't like the answer it's got to cough up. Because the ego is going to have to tell the truth, and it resists that. But it can't resist this constant childlike hammering. Do you see this? Because if you look at that book or you look at my sessions, because when I wrote that book, that was everything I had. Now, much has come since then, of course, and my very best stuff's not even in that book. I'm probably not going to put it in a book. So, but it's a slow reeling you in the sense of, do you see this? Yes. And we build on that. Okay, well, that's good. So now, do you see this? Yes. Do you see this? Yes. Do you see? So it's very much of a progression, and it's 1,000 questions done in a progression that becomes, and it changes every time for everybody. Whoever it is, that's the reason I call it the living method. It is alive. I don't do it. It just comes through here.
Right.
Because I don't do any of this. Just like a minute ago, and I said, I don't know where I was. When I give a live talk, I'll stop 4, 5, 6 times and ask the audience, where the hell was I? Because when this thing stops, there's nobody in the room but Fred, and he doesn't know anything about this stuff. The other thing that I have learned is not just to make it simple, but the 2 other things I've learned. One is that talk and tell doesn't work very well. I mean, and this sounds, what I mean by talk and tell is that we tend to talk about enlightenment a great deal. And I've written 2 books and an ebook on it. So I've done my share of it too.
Yeah.
But it's actually, and I've got 45 videos. So I know that so I've really done my share. Nonetheless, having said that, what I have discovered is that talk and tell, where we're trying to give transmission via talking about this with people, if it was very effective, millions of people would be awake who are not.
Right.
And I work with people who all the time who have been in non-duality 10, 20, 30, 40, 45 years. 45 years. I've got 2 guys that have been in non-duality 45 years and weren't close and woke up with me in about 2 hours. So obviously something different is happening. Yeah. And what it is that show and tell works. So I don't talk to them about enlightenment. I remember when I was on Back Gap, and a woman wrote Rick right after that, because he forwarded the email to me, and it was the first person that I did a session with after Back Gap. I saw you on Back Gap and I want a session. And she wrote Rick, and she said, this guy doesn't talk about enlightenment. He takes you right there and shows it to you. Mm-hmm. And that's what I do. The other thing that I've learned, though, is that, so think about this. We think that waking up is so very difficult. That's what we've always thought, and I always thought that. Mm-hmm. And what you can find out, you can reach a point where you find out that actually waking up's not what's hard. Staying asleep is what's hard, because we're having to constantly overcome our experience with our thinking about our experience. Yeah. So what I found out, though, is it can't be that difficult to know to just see our true nature, or I couldn't do it virtually every day. Virtually every day. I did 2 yesterday. So and when I do these people come to an initial awakening. Obviously, an awakening here does not mean that we're now going to push Adyashanti or Nisargadatta off the stage so we can talk. There are levels of clarity, mm-hmm. but they do come to an initial awakening. They see their true nature. Mm-hmm. They're tickled to death. Yeah. And it's authentic, and there are people I have who've been in this thing for a while who wake up and never appreciably go back to sleep. And when I say that, what I mean is that when cloudiness comes in, it's recognized, and this is part of the process too.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Instead of, it's broken. I lost it. I had it, I lost it, I now got to get it back. Right. So it isn't that difficult to see our true nature, or I couldn't do what I do. But when I say I do what I do, let me tell you the shorthand secret on that. I say I wake people up, this, that, and the other. It's shorthand. I tell people at my house, if I thought I had to come downstairs and wake up 2 people, I wouldn't leave my room. I wouldn't get out of bed. So I facilitate that. Right. But it's just a lot shorter to say I woke people up. Right. And you got lots of it, I'm sure. But the thing that I've discovered is that although it's not difficult to see our true nature, it's difficult. It is difficult to accept it, to accept what we see. So 2/3 of my awakening sessions are actually bringing people to an absolute surety of what they are not.
Right.
Because what I've discovered is that once we have convincingly showed, I don't know if it's the mind or truth itself, whatever. Once we've convincingly, let's call it the mind. Once we've convincingly shown the mind what it's not, or I should say the unit, the body mind.
Right.
I call these units. So this body mind. Once I've shown this unit what it's not, then there's an openness there. At which point I can come in, introduce what you are, and it takes.
Right.
And I do that via stories usually, and long tradition of spiritual truth being transmitted via story, and there's good reasons for that. One of them is that you can slip stuff into a story that the mind will very patiently sit there and listen to and will not shut down on. So you come in and just and then you slip something in, and it's like, and it hits home before it realizes it's been screwed. Do you see what I mean?
That reminds me, one of the things I've found more effective lately is posing questions rather than telling people things.
Yes.
And keeping the mind. It's like start off a sentence with "What if this were the case?" I'm not saying it is the case.
Yeah, that's right.
What if this were the case?
I do a very similar thing. I do it from the, well, let's pretend you're oneness. and and sometimes I'll switch it to where let's pretend you're not.
Right.
But I like that very much because it's that light touch. Mm-hmm. So the mind doesn't immediately raise it up because you've already offered it an out.
Right.
You're just showing it something, and what if?
Right.
I get that. Well, I probably use what if, so I like that. I have not used that before, so it's direct theft.
Speaking of which, I thought that I had this original use of the past to enter the present, and this sort of came to me one day where I went back and relived a childhood memory, and during the process of re-envisioning that memory, paid attention to what was there watching that's here today watching this.
Yes.
And what hasn't changed at all.
That's exactly right.
That's
exactly right.
So it's kind of, and I think you use that in your book.
I do. I was going to say that sounds like my sense of being inquiry that I use.
Yeah,
I do a shorter version of that now, but it's a powerful thing, and you can notice that. Well, you notice that there's something there because there's something recording this stuff.
All right.
Because I'm not having to say, okay, this is going to be a fascinating talk with Trey. Let's be sure to remember this and press, record. Yet tomorrow, if you ask me about this, I will be able to recall it because its own file, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to do it. This thing, whatever it is that is recording that, so to speak, whatever it is that's observing that, it doesn't need my permission, and it doesn't need my direction. It just does what it does.
Yeah.
And that's the key. And understanding that what I'd like to do with people is once they've recognized this, what I call that sense of being, is I'll ask them. So when you notice that, do you have to connect to that, or do you just have to notice it? And inevitably they'll say, oh, well, I just have to notice it. And I'll say, okay, now let me ask you this. Can you disconnect from that? And the answer is always the same. No. I can see where I can be aware of it or not aware of it, but I can't actually. So we're hung with this sense of being.
Yeah.
Once we recognize that, then we realize, well, damn, there's some kind of bigger picture going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the teachings, John Sherman, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I've not followed him, but I know who he is, the old bank robber or whatever it was. And I've seen him a good bit since he's been sober, been with Ganga G.
Okay. The Just Look at Yourself website is his, and it's simply directing your attention 180 degrees to look at what's looking.
That's right.
And that was...
That's exactly right.
I finally got Ramana Maharshi's teaching by reading something by John Sherman. It was kind of like the who am I thing just didn't really do it for me until I realized it's a directional shift of attention.
Right. That's exactly right.
And according to him, the thing to do is just continue to do that whenever you think about it, just for a few seconds throughout the day. And that gradually sort of, I guess, wears down your identification with thought. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly how he would put it, but
that's the John Sherman method. Right. I have the Lytic method. You have the Troy method. Because the thing that people need to understand is they get confused. Why does this teaching contradict that teaching? Why doesn't everybody teach exactly the same thing in exactly the same way? I mean, isn't there just one truth? Right. And the fact is, yes, fundamentally there's one truth, but that truth, in order to reach you, in order to reach an audience, it has to come through this, or that, or a John Sherman, or a Gangaji, or a whoever. And so when it comes through here, it doesn't reach you pure. It reaches you so that you're seeing Fred's skew on this thing. There's still Fredness here. It's going to color anything that I say or do.
Right.
And so, including teach. Mm-hmm. And I'm never telling the truth to begin with. I'm always lying to the highest ability I can. And so when you take that and then you realize it's skewed by personality, by the conditioning that's here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because there's certainly unique conditioning for every one of us.
Right.
Our DNA arrives here on the planet. It, stripped of itself, is almost unique or unique. I mean, the odds are incredible on that.
Right.
And then when you figure out that you take that DNA and you put it through an exact set of conditioning, for instance, that this one went through,
right.
And all those circumstances and all that, and you recognize that, wow, that just got it conditioned the conditioning. And so, and what we can realize then is that until we wake up, this is hard. I understand if you're watching this thing and you're not awake. This is hard to accept, but you don't have to accept it. But this is true in my understanding, is that basically until we wake up, we are like burlap sacks that have got red buttons glued all over us. And as we roll through life, it is conditioning meeting circumstance. Bam, bam, bam. And when we wake up, suddenly we can begin to view that from the eyes of truth instead of the eyes of Fred. And at that point we can begin really the clearing process, which is actually much more taxing than waking up. It's just that the waking up gets all the press.
So I guess one of the questions that would probably come up is your daily life. What's that like, being in this state of non-dual awareness, for lack of a better way of putting it, as far as being the witness of the witness throughout your daily life?
Right. Yeah. It's it's pretty. I mean, I'm kind of a skewed one to ask that, because I live, breathe, sleep, and everything else. This. I'm a one-trick pony. This is what I do. I do it for a living, and I do it for joy. So if I'm not teaching it, I'm probably in the living room reading it, which is rare these days.
Yeah.
Because I'm either teaching it or writing it directly an awful lot. So, and I move in. These days, it's very different than it was even a year ago, because all of these sessions, the chief result on is that they've cleared this up. Because every single time I have to take this through, those basics every day, sometimes twice a day. Boom, 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 boom. Look at this. Oh, and I'm seeing it too. So it's cleared this up tremendously, and now I move with a certain fluidity that. I'll tell you what, I had a woman yesterday. This doesn't happen often, but it's not the first time it's happened, but it's been a long time since it did happen last. And I had a client blow up on me yesterday. Because what I do is I have to get them aligned with what I'm doing, because their ego wants to run my session. And but of course it's and I have to get really brutal and I say, how many? Do you notice that you've never done one of these sessions? Do you know that I've done about 500? Which one of us do you think might know how this should go? Whatever. And this woman just blew up, and there was no real response here.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, I'm sorry. There's nothing personal here, and I certainly didn't mean any disrespect. I'm just trying to tell ego it doesn't get to run the show, and ego's been wounded, and it's lashed out at me or whatever.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, there was the body tensed up and stuff during that. It's not like it didn't affect me at all,
Right.
but there was no. But you had to be in my head
Mm-hmm.
to know that there had been an effect. The body didn't yell back or throw down the phone, and we ended up that session, and this woman's a life coach, and we started out that session with her blow up, and we ended up, or just shortly into it, she blew up, and then at the end of it, she said, "So are we okay about my blowing up earlier?" And I said, "Sure, we're fine about it." She said, "Because I just want to tell you, I'm your student, and I bow to your feet." So that's quite a damn shift, is it not? From going, you don't have any respect, you're just, it was awful. And so that she did. I told her, don't worry about it. She made the best comeback I've ever seen, and she did.
Yeah.
So I forgot what we were talking about on this thing now.
Oh, everyday experience with
everyday experience.
Yeah.
So I'll move with a great fluidity, which is that whatever happens, this seems to move in that direction. And I mean, I had one woman when I was in Asheville a couple of weeks ago and did my sessions. I had a young woman, probably 23, 24, something like that, and she was asking about, what should I do with my life? And the first thing I always say, if you want life advice, I'd find somebody who didn't live in a park. But I was willing to go on record as giving her the general thing of look for which way the wind is blowing and be willing to align yourself. Be willing to go in that direction. And that's what happens here. It's the same thing that's happened with my practice. My practice has exploded in the last year. Yeah. And it's done so, it's just been such a radical shift. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And you can't, because the unit knows it can't do this stuff, and it just is perplexed. It's like, wow, why are they coming to see you? Why are you getting to see me? But it has happened perfectly without my doing anything.
Yeah. Because
what's happened is that there has been such a pull. The teaching just gnaws at me all the time. There's like this, come on, get in front of the computer, do this, get this better, get this perfect. All this stuff, it never leaves me alone. And very, very rarely, I can't hardly take a day off for rest, just general unit recuperation.
Yeah.
But, man, I don't even know where I was again. So, what were we talking about?
So if you're in effect following where the wind takes you, you're just kind of going with the flow.
Yes, because what I noticed is without my doing anything, all of the volunteers that I would need in order to build begin to build a organization. It's a disorganized organization. It just has done itself.
Right.
And all the volunteers have arisen, and I've got a business manager in Florida and an editor in Florida, and I got somebody here and somebody there, and and an events manager in Asheville. All this, that, and the other, and all of these people have just fallen together.
Yeah.
I haven't sought any of them. They've all come to me, and that's the best description of my life.
Yeah.
Is that I try to do as little as possible. But there's such a pull by the teaching that it looks like a push from here. In other words, I don't mind shameless self-promotion. I think it's a wonderful teaching. I think this is one of the most powerful things going on. It really is. Yeah. And so why would I not want to shout that from the rooftops? And just the fact that goes against the feelings, beliefs, and wishes of a lot of people in non-duality, I can't help that.
Right.
I kept it actually under my hat for a while as to what I was really doing. And then last year, about a year ago, I read Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance, and which I'd always veered away from because I thought it was, pull yourself up by your bootstrings. Mm-hmm. It's not. It's self-reliance with a capital S. It's reliance on that self.
Gotcha.
And it was a freedom to come out and be yourself. Actually do what you're doing. And so I came out and I just started saying, look, and I backed myself to the wall and said, I'm taking on all comers. Call me, I'll try to wake you up. I bet I can.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened at that time was I really let loose of this guy. Because I didn't want to be a spiritual teacher like I am. Who wants to be that, man? I wanted to be Eckhart Tolle or Rupert Spira, the quiet master comes out and just, talks in hushed tones and that sweet baritone and da-da-da, and all that stuff, and that everybody loved and respected and everything. And instead, I'm a hick from South Carolina who's funny as hell. And that's what I do.
Yeah.
And I'm quite self-deprecating. People will tell me, they'll ask me if I'm at a meeting or something, do you really think that there's really an acceleration to enlightenment because our planet, because of our planet or whatever, our planet's condition? And I just have one answer for that, If this is in the front of the room, the planet is in trouble. So, but that's not that's not the kind of teacher I wanted to be. But it turns out that a lot of people actually like me.
Yeah.
Not me, not the next Eckhart Tolle, not the next Adyashanti, not the next this or that, but just Fred Davis. So that's what I've come to see, is that I'm just the first Fred Davis. Doesn't need to be a second. My wife wouldn't take $1 million for me. I don't think she'd give you a nickel for another one just like me.
One thing I was going to ask you about is your upcoming events. You're coming back to Asheville sometime soon, aren't you?
Coming back to Asheville on May 31 and June 1st.
Okay.
It's going to be a bigger one this time. We had an awakening session, the first group session that I've ever done. It was very successful. We had multiple initial awakenings, which didn't shock me completely, but I didn't know if it was going to work or not. Yeah. I knew it was going to either fall on my face, or that we were going to have something extraordinary happen, and we had something extraordinary happen.
That's great.
It is. Well, it's very cool, and we're going to do that for a little bit bigger crowd. We only wanted 10 in the last one. I think we ended up with 12, but I had meant to only have it for 10. And the next one we're going to allow 25. And that's about the venue, what the venue can hold. It's Barbara's house.
Yeah.
And that's about what we can comfortably sit, is about 25. So we're going to try it with a larger audience and see how well it carries there. I don't know. Yeah. But I have to believe that what had happened before is that two women from Asheville had come down, and they were best friends, and they wanted to wake up in the same session.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I've never done this before. I don't know if it'll work or not. And they said, well, it's our money, and we want to try. And I said, that's great, because now I had permission to fail.
Right.
All the pressure's off.
Yeah.
And they both woke up. And I went, damn, if it'll work for 2, I bet you it'll work for 10. Yeah. Now my thinking, if it'll work for 10, it'll work for 25. At some place, and it could be between 10 and 25,
right,
there's going to be a place where you get diminishing returns.
Right.
Where the energy, because that's one of the things people talk about with my meetings, it's huge energy and all of this, and I don't know that I can go into an auditorium, right, if you follow me, and wake up, I suppose. But at least I can do groups now, which is cool.
Yeah.
And but my real joy, my ultimate joy, is still one-on-one, because that's where it really happens.
Yeah.
For any teacher.
Yeah.
Really, it's that one-on-one with the teacher that or at least for me, and that's been my experience, is that's what really pays off. And what happens is we adopt Eckhart Tolle or Adyashanti or somebody else as Byron Katie or something. In other words, the nationally known figures, and that's my teacher, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
But at some point, I recognized that, there's only so much this person can give me, because they don't know why I live. They don't know why I'm alive.
Yeah.
And so I came down to the secondary stream of teachers, of which you and I belong to, and I got Scott Killaby, and he's the one that helped me stabilize. I've been awake for 3.5 years when I met Scott, but he really helped me stabilize and really get it in another sort of way, and he did a lot of that in the first 40 minutes that I knew him.
Yeah.
So very, just amazing what happens when a teacher comes in and really starts doing the one-on-one thing. Because if it's an awake being that's teaching, it comes out generalized because it's for like a group satsang or an auditorium full of people, or it's a book, or it's a video, and therefore everything that's taught has to come out generalized. Yeah. But when I'm actually talking to someone, for instance, when we look at recorded satsangs, or we look at books or whatever that are written down, by transcribed satsangs, that was not a generalized teaching.
Right.
It was that teacher was speaking to that person that he could feel a lot about, and that person's exact situation that they told him about. In other words, there are 100 factors there that can only play out one-on-one. There's no way to get it. Just in my sure, I don't want to say no way to get it. It's easier to get it. Sure as I say there's no way to get it, then I suddenly know how you wake up. I don't have the slightest idea. I don't even know what I'm doing here, other than we're supposed to be talking. I know that. That's great. Yep. That's all I know about what this unit should be up to.
That's all I know too.
That's it. We're just not privy to all the information we used to have.
Yeah.
I don't know who I am. I don't know where I am. I don't know if either one of those things makes sense. The irony of this is that as soon as I discovered, quote, who I am, I simultaneously discovered I didn't know what that was. So it's like, great, I know what I am, who I am, but I don't know what that is. And I still don't, and I don't need to. I notice that I don't care.
Yeah. That's great. Well, if people want to get a hold of you for private sessions, how would they go about doing that?
The easiest thing to hook up with me is just go to awakeningclaritynow.com, and you can see it. There's a sessions page there, and go there if you're broke, because you don't have to pay to use that site. There's a huge amount of information on that site. You've got a book excerpt on there. There are lots and lots of well-known teachers who have. I used to do a different type of website that was really hosting other people, and that's now morphed into my own site. It's a new site, where it's really about my teachings. But all of that stuff is there. You can do searches for, you can search names, and a lot of the big names will be there. But even and then there's a ton of my writing. I started that website, or at least the original one. I started less than 3 years ago, and there are over 200 posts. Yeah. So that's cranking them out. There are hundreds of thousands of words there. Yeah. There are links there to my videos, which people write me. They've woken up from my videos. Mm-hmm. And they're there, and they're free. Yeah. And so the people will write me, and they'll want me to, and I don't do sessions for free. I didn't get them free from Scott, and I don't give them free. Just a quirk.
Right.
And but the funny thing is that if you check into a lot of that, which I have done, I could tell from the letter, they haven't read my books. Right. They haven't really gone over the website. They just heard I can wake people up and wake me up. Yeah. Instead of going to work, because that's what nobody wants to do in spirituality. Is we all want that big, lazy awakening, where I never have to be alert again, and it's just God Almighty, and I call it the S&M version of spirituality, which is tie me up and make me see. And I don't see that happening much.
That sounds good.
So I'll shut up and let you close this thing down.
No. Well, I appreciate you talking to me. It was a lot of fun.
Great. I'm so we've emailed a bunch of times. It's wonderful to finally meet you.
And
I
hope to see you
I want
next
to meet you
time.
in person in Asheville at some point.
Yeah. Because you said May 31 and June 1.
Yeah. And June 1 would be the clarity session, and you come the same way we talked about before.
Okay.
Okay. So if you can't, I get it. You're busy, and you're busy with your own teaching instead of fretting about mine. But I very much appreciate Asheville Sangha and what you do and what Cullen do. Cullen, is that right? Yeah. What he does and just that whole thing. That whole thing's just got a wonderful vibe. It's very Asheville.
Good. Glad to have you a part of it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And books again, Book of Undoing.
Okay. The Book of Undoing,
And
then there is Non-Duality and the 12 Steps.
okay.
They can come to the website and get a free little book. Sign up and get a free little book called Awakening Clarity, a Spiritual Sampler.
Okay.
And that's about 50 pages or something like that.
Sounds good.
It's a Kindle, and and then this summer there will be another book, which I won't even say the title, but it's kind of tied into the first one.
Got
But
it.
there should be John's working on. It's going to be a compilation of columns, and somebody's
Okay.
putting that together for me.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
Good to talk to you.
great to talk to you, Trey.
All right.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, and you have a good day.
Same to you. Bye bye.
Bye.